Greetings, dear friends, fellow programmers, and those aspiring to be. In this video, we will be taking a deep dive into the world of asynchronous service initialization in ASP.NET Core 8. And of course, by the end of this video, you'll be a master of it. Trust me. So, how can you understand this concept? Imagine you're a person opening a coffee shop, and every day you open your store, but at that moment you already need to have coffee already brewed and ready for the first customer to offer it to them, so they do not have to wait for 15 or 20 minutes for your coffee to be brewed. So in those cases, you need to have your application already started before the first customer has started using it. It is the same story with ASP.NET Core and asynchronous service initialization, because in some services you need to do some initialization for them before they can start handling requests. And that is exactly where asynchronous initialization comes to our rescue. Sometimes our services need to perform some real-life tasks that we want them to perform before they can function properly. I'm talking about things like database migrations, like data seeding, or something like fetching the configurations from a remote server. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense that your service requires certain things to be ready before it can start using those things. For example, you cannot work with an empty database and behave like there already is stuff seeded in your database. And in those cases, you definitely will benefit a lot from utilizing asynchronous service initialization, because it will allow you to do stuff before your service actually starts working. And I already am familiar with the fact that all of this stuff can sound very abstract indeed, which is exactly the reason why we're about to jump into our Visual Studio environment and see how all of this works in action. So let's jump right into it. Welcome to Visual Studio environment. And here, as you can see, I have already prepared a few treats for you. So what I did here was that I have prepared an interface which is going to be called IAsyncInitializer, and it will contain just a single method which returns a task, which is called InitializeAsync. And now we have a concrete implementation for this interface. It is going to be called DataInitializer, and inside of it we will use dependency injection to inject our DB context, which is called myDBContext, and also we have implemented the InitializeAsync method from our interface. What we did here was basically we're performing a check whether our user's DB set in Entity Framework has any users inside of it. And if that is the case and we have no users in the database at this point, we want to seed the database with our initial user, and we're going to do just that. So this line right here is responsible for creating our first user. It is going to be called admin, and its email is going to be this right here. And after we have executed this line, which is adding a new user into a user's DB set, we just invoke SaveChangesAsync method on our DB context. And basically, after we have done that, everything will be executed under the hood for us, and our database will not be empty. We'll always have this initial user, and then we can basically proceed and do whatever we like. Now, before we keep going, let me open our DB context just to show you that it's a very simple scenario in there. We just have inherited from DB context class provided by Entity Framework. We are then using our constructor to pass DB context options because it's a required thing to do, and we pass those options into the base class, which is DB context. Besides that, we have just a single DB set for our users, and we have defined our user entity as well. It only has ID, email, and name. So basically, You already see that we are working with a very simple example here just to show you how everything works under the hood. So right now we can jump to our Program.cs file and proceed with our discussion there. And in our Program.cs file, the situation seems, well, very straightforward, I have to say. It looks very simple. We are just registering our DB context using addDBContext method on our services, which is provided by Entity Framework Library. And we are also specifying that we want to be using SQL Server, which is again extension library provided in our NuGet packages, which we included. And then we have registered our IAsyncInitializer and its concrete implementation, DataInitializer, as transient services. So basically, this right here is the simplest way to register our services in ASP.NET Core. But now comes the magical part of our implementation. We are going to talk about the way how this initializer is going to be invoked on our application's startup. So what we need to do here is to make sure that our initializer is going to be invoked and executed before our pipeline with middlewares has started receiving requests, which happens to be this line right here. When we say app.run, we're basically starting with request handling of our application. So we need to do this initialization part before that. So we will squeeze it in right here. This right here is a method we are about to define together. So right here we have created a private static async method that is called Initialization, and this method of ours is expecting to receive a web application instance, which we will then use to create a new scope. Then we are using this scope instance to get service for IAsyncInitializer interface, because we registered it that it is going to be DataInitializer instance. We will receive this instance right here, and then for each of those initializers, we want to go through all of them and invoke initialize async method on them. This right here will ensure that all the services that are inheriting and implementing our IAsyncInitializer interface will be initialized before our application has started handling requests, and it will be done asynchronous. So basically, what we achieved here in reality is that our database will be seeded before our application starts handling requests. Okay. You still might not be too happy with my explanation, and you could use additional clarification in the area. That is exactly why I have prepared yet another example for you to enjoy and learn something new. So if you remember my examples of scenarios where you want to do something before you start running and listening for requests in your application, I mentioned that there are certain scenarios where you want to fetch configurations from a remote server. And I have prepared an example where I have covered that scenario as well. And basically those two are the most commonly used scenarios I've ever had to encounter. Let me show you what I mean. Right here we have remote config initializer, and as you already guessed, it implements IAsyncInitializer interface. And inside of it we have two private fields called configuration and HTTP client, because you're about to see why we need those. So we inject those two things in our constructor, and dependency injection will do all the magic and infrastructure for us, so we do not have to worry about it. And then we just need to use our HTTP client to get string async from this server right here, and then we use the response we received to basically deserialize it into a dictionary of strings, and then we go through each of those configuration items in our dictionary and push them into our configuration instance that we provided as well. So basically what this will do is reach to this external server, receive the response from the server with the configurations we were expecting, and then use those to put them in our local app settings configuration file. And we want this to be executed before our application has started listening to requests. So now that we covered this, we need to jump to our Program.cs file and register everything we need for this. So basically, I will just uncomment these two lines where we are specifying that we want to use our HTTP client. We need it because we are using it in that service. And also that we want to use a concrete instance for our IAsyncInitializer interface that is remote config initializer. So now when we run this application, everything is going to work exactly the same. We are still going to use our initialize async part right here. And with this, we're going to ensure that our service will be executed before our application actually starts working. And my friend, there you have it. We have just learned and hopefully mastered how can we allow our application to execute and perform some critical things before we actually start using it. Whether it's going to be seeding your database or fetching some configurations that are of critical value before our application starts running from some external server, well, you can now do it. And you are completely able to do it on your own. So right now, I would like to encourage you to take a while, practice this in action, and you will be golden. You'll be able to apply this in your day-to-day life and be an amazing developer. So, as usual, if you found this video useful, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel because it really means a lot. And also, I would like to thank you for watching and wish you an amazing day. Happy coding!